Well, hello. Welcome once again to Pale Blooms and Beyond. Thank you for joining us today. Glasgow-born Chris Thomson first came to the music's public's attention as a frontman, singer, and guitarist for 80s pop band Friends Again. Although the band formed in 1981, the recorded output began in '83, culminating in 4 singles, an EP, and an album, Trapped and Unwrapped, in 1984. The next year, the band were no more. In 1987, Chris switched gears and Friends Again could barely be seen in the rearview mirror. His new project, The Bathers, a chamber pop ensemble, was far removed from the sound and image of his previous band. This project would eventually develop more longevity, spanning the entirety of the 90s up through 2001, when the band called it a day. Fast forward to 2016, and the Bathers reformed. A back catalog was released, and live shows in Glasgow, Edinburgh, and London followed. And in June of this year, 2022, a brand new album, Summer Lightning. Well, welcome, Chris.
Hello, nice to be here.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, pleasure.
Good. Let's go back, take a trip in the Wayback Machine. Few years, I guess. Talk about your childhood memories, and not just pertaining to music.
Well, I was very lucky. I grew up in a small town just on the, I'd say it's only 8 to 10 miles from the very center of Glasgow, which is a big kind of post-industrial city. But we were a town that was on the River Clyde, which ends up coming through Glasgow, but the very leafy, so a very ancient castle was perched on the river there, very beautiful. So we had a kind of idyllic childhood of being able to really run free in these kind of riverside woodlands and walks, and we were really into wildlife, particularly the which birds we could see and that sort of thing. Pretty much the whole, everything seemed to be lived outdoors then. The pre-digital social media age, everything was all about playing sports with your friends. Football or soccer, as you might say, was our big thing, and wherever you could throw down a couple of jumpers, jersey, and kick the ball around and just start playing a game. One particularly fond memory is we had just 5 minutes from my family home, we had an old bowling green, so beautifully flat surface, but for some reason it just happened to close down permanently. And as kids, we were allowed to we sort of went in and took over. So we had a perfect size little mini pitch for it to play on, and I'm sure we probably destroyed it over that summer, but we were able to that would be something like the summer of '74. As I remember just really becoming aware of pop music at that time as well. An early favorite, a lot of the glam rock stuff, Sweet, Slade, and of course David Bowie. It was a massive. I remember someone saying, "Oh, there's David Bowie. He's got a song out called Rebel Rebel." So I know that was 1974, but I remember being very intrigued because I'd heard it on the radio, and it just seemed, so the glamour of an excitement of that music scene was already starting to. I guess I was about 12 at the time, when I started to, my ears were twitching a bit towards what am I hearing on the radio. It always made there in the background. My mum was a big Beatles fan, and I remember her cousin used to lend us. I still got many of them, the original Apple 45s. So they were in the house through that whole period. My dad was into some Dylan and Donovan things, so there was music there. But I began to discover music for myself from about '74. And gradually the playing of sports dwindled down to playing in garage bands and things like that. We of course the punk revolution came along in '77, which was a big thing for me. About like 15, started to buy the music press, the New Musical Express, the Melody Maker, all these things, and got highly drawn in. And my friend said, well, why don't we start a band? Which seemed like a great idea, except no one could actually play anything. I was just like handicapped, but I'll be forever grateful to the punk revolution that didn't seem to matter. You know, like it was almost a bonus that you couldn't play. So
right.
we
it was that DIY attitude.
DIY, totally. I mean, we had a garage, as we would call it. And we set up in this little concrete space and made an unholy racket. I mean, at one point, a retired ex-police superintendent who was a neighbour got so annoyed that he parked his massive Volvo against the garage door, so we were trapped in there. Yeah, and it was kind of like to give us a warning, you know. It must have been, you know, when you look back, you're like, oh, what's his problem? But you realize you must have been creating unholy hell in the neighborhood. You know, this dreadful kind of noise, this punk thrash.
Going back just a little bit, do you remember the first album or single that you ever got?
Oh yeah, and I wish you could say it was something a lot cooler than it was. I'm sure a lot of people are in the same boat on that one. Right. The first record I owned was a Christmas gift, and it was I don't even know if you know this one, Two Little Boys by a guy called Rolf Harris, who unfortunately is now in prison. He's an Australian. He was very, very big on British television for kids. Right. I can't remember the show he did, but he did art and he played a didgeridoo, and he was like someone's nice friendly uncle, but it turned out he was a bit of a sex pest. So he ended up, just the last 10 or 15 years, he was one of these sort of sacred cows, you know. Everyone loved Rolf Harris, and he had this record called Two Little Boys, which is horribly sentimental, but it's about two little boys that go off to war and only one comes back, and two little boys had two. I mean, it was really kind of, that would have been about 1969, and my aunt gave me that for Christmas. So you could say I had no control over it, but I did love the record. My big sister was given Sugar Sugar by the Archies. You got the better deal. Yeah, that was a single there. We cut to the chase. 2 or 3 years later, I went into Boots, the pharmacy here, big pharmacy chain, who also had, like Woolworths, they had the record counter. So you went in, and I was very nervous about it, but the first record I actually bought was David Bowie, which is great. Unfortunately, it was Laughing Gnome, which is not one of his. You know, I'd still actually love the record, but it's I can't say I bought Genie or something, you know, the actual classics. But yeah, so it was a David Bowie record. And then I became heavily into a band called Mud, who were a little bit cheesy. They did a lot of
still in the glam genre.
Very much the glam genre, Sweet, Bowie, Slade, all those things. Yeah. So there you have it. Laughing Gnome.
Were you into T-Rex at all?
You know, I love T-Rex. I don't know particularly why I didn't buy the records. I thought things are right. I remember when I started taping the chart show from the BBC on a Sunday night. It was a big thing, you know. We got a music center, so you could suddenly record the radio, which was a technical marvel to us. And I was recording. I loved the T. I remember things like Ride a White Swan and things were I loved the T-Rex work. Cosmic Dancer, but for some reason I never actually bought a record. Don't know why, but I did love them.
I hear over and over again how influential he was.
Oh yeah.
Well, you mentioned the going into the pharmacy. Was there a particular record store that was a favorite of yours? You know, as a teen.
Yeah, let's see now. There were some good. When I was in my mid-teens, there was quite an explosion in independent record stores here that partly fed into the punk revolution. Right. There was a guy called Bruce's Records in Glasgow and Edinburgh, and the guy Bruce Finlay basically managed the early Simple Minds, I think he managed it for 5 or 6 years. So he had the record store, and I believe he also basically sort of released independent singles. So that was quite exciting. There was a lot of shops around like that. There's a couple of crazy old hippie brothers that ran a great shop in the centre of Glasgow, and we would travel in from the suburbs, 15-minute train ride in with our £10 pocket money or whatever we had, and you'd buy 2 or 3 vinyl albums. Posters were a big thing. I was saying to my daughter the other day, posters was quite a thing, and your badges. And if you really had to spare cash, maybe some black and white photos that were kind of professionally taken of David Bowie, whoever. But that was the big Saturday night in town, or Saturday afternoon in town, coming in for that. And there was the Virgin Mega store opened round about then. HMV were they always there. But I liked the independent stores. That felt more dangerous, and more atmospheric. The bootlegs were lurking in there as well. So it was always a good.
There was one, how I got into a lot of the 80s alternative stuff. There was one here that I used to go to all the time, and the owner would let me try out the record first, and and it was usually the ones that I liked were from the cover. It's like, wow, that looks mysterious, or that looks like something I might like, and it usually ended up being up my alley.
It's the power of some good cover artwork just to draw you in. It's not to be underestimated. I mean, I had a similar experience in I think again it was Boots the Pharmacy, and I saw this record and a sticker 50p, which is even then was pretty cheap. Because most things were, I think, about £2.50. But that's still something at 50p, and I recognised the name. It was Iggy and the Stooges, Raw Power, and of course there's that iconic Mick Rock shot of Iggy playing. I think he was playing in a London gig, and it's like 50p. I think I've heard of this, and then of course I turned it over, and David Bowie had mixed it, for his sins. It was an unmixable record, as it turned out, but I absolutely loved that record. But that was, when you think of something like Boots the Pharmacy, it was quite a sort of conservative environment, but there you have it, a kind of proto-punk record on sale, I'll have that, and I still to this day love that. It's such a, I guess it's tied with that memory of being about 15 and discovering something that just seems so out there, so different to anything I'd heard before. Fantastic.
And I think a lot of with time there comes maturity, your music, taste matures. So a lot of the stuff that I didn't like early on, late 60s, early 70s, I pick up on now, and I was like, why didn't I like that the first time I heard it?
Absolutely, that's a very good point. I found that myself. I mean, my good friend Paul McGeechan, who was in Friends Again, and we're now still working on various things together. He was very much coming from prog rock, Led Zeppelin, Tangerine Dream. He mentioned them last night to me. Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Now those things were sort of anathema to me, really. It was not within my punkish sort of creed. They were not acceptable. But I can listen to. I mean, I think Zeppelin are fantastic. But at the time, it's just, I don't know. You can be trapped within what you're allowed to like, or what you will allow yourself to like. And there's certain things I still hate. Like I had friends who were into Kiss. I hated it then. I hate it now. Some things don't change, but the good stuff, you go, oh yeah, no. With maturity, as you say, your tastes become more, I guess, more wider, more evolved, less picky, less ideologically driven, as it were.
The only Kiss song that I ever liked was Beth.
Yeah. I know I've heard it. I can't even remember it. So it wasn't too offensive to me. But is that a good one? I'll check that.
Yeah, check that out. It's a ballad, and it's the drummer that sings it, so it's not that rocking out,
the rocking out type thing. Yeah. That's the things like Zeppelin. Yeah, absolutely classic. The playing, the whole attitude. It's really, really powerful.
I know that. I latched onto them quite late too. I remember my friend having to tell me "Stairway to Heaven." I don't know why I didn't hear it. He had to introduce me to the song, and I was like, wow. Immediately I liked it. I don't know why I wasn't listening to the right stations, or I don't know.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I know that's one of the absolute. It's such a. so often people enter Led Zeppelin through something like Stairway because it's quite an accessible tune in its way. You know, it's very the evocative lyrics, and I think I remember, as I say, my friend Paul was highly into Zepp, but I do remember we, as ever, you know, that some of the girls that were in our kind of friendship group, and we'd have liked to be more than just friends, as it were, but some of them were quite kind of hippie-ish, and of course that was an incentive to suddenly go, well, yeah, I like Stairway to Heaven, you know, was it such a big tune to slightly hippie-ish girls, you know, the kind of Afghan coats and things. It was brilliant.
Right. Get
So
your foot in
that
the
was
door.
an incentive to sort of, well, okay, I'll concede Stairway to Heaven is a good try.
That's good. Well, yeah, I was going to ask you in a little bit, once we get up to Friends again, the influences that each member brought to the band.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
But I wanted to ask you about your first concert that you went to. Do you remember your first concert?
Yeah, vividly, because it was, well, again, it was David Bowie. You know, no surprises. It was, I think I would have been 16. It was on the 1978 tour.
Okay.
Stage, which I've just seen some amazing footage of that tour on this Moon Age Daydream film that's just come out.
Oh,
I don't know if it's really worth seeing if you like his stuff at all.
Yeah.
It's a powerful film, but one piece of footage was, which I don't think has ever properly been seen before, was a performance of Heroes in London at the Earl's Court Arena. And it's very vivid. It's you feel like you're on the stage with the musicians. It's very well filmed.
Wow.
And that's the tour I saw. So my first gig was, we had a wonderful venue here in Glasgow called the Apollo.
Mm-hmm.
One of these sort of legendary, really great, I think it'd been an old cinema or a playhouse, and huge high stage. It must have been 25, 30 feet up. When certain rock bands like Kiss probably and Status Quo played there, they say the balcony used to move by about 5 inches.
Oh,
it could take it. But the place, it was one of those that had that intense old theatre, about 3,500 people. So everyone had a great view. The sound was amazing. So that was my first concert experience. I remember walking in, and I'd never experienced things like dry ice before. So as we come into the venue, it was like dark and moody and dry. And I went, what is going, that smell and that the mist swirling around?
Yeah.
What this? It was just like stepping into another world. And what was playing as the kind of, you know, background music was Brian Eno, Another Green World. I don't know if you know those. I mean, which again is so out there, but it's just so otherly.
Right.
So that I immediately, of course, went and bought those albums when I, you know, as soon as I could. And Bowie just was mind blowing. You know, it was like 30 feet away up on this huge stage with that incredible band. You know, an absolute peak. So it was a great place to start. You know, and looking back, he actually did 4 nights in Glasgow. Things were different then. There was slightly, the venues were smaller, certainly here. I don't know how it was with you, but you know, you would have to do 4 nights in Glasgow, 3 nights in Newcastle city halls, because these were all kind of old school venues that would hold 2, 3, 4,000 rather than these 12, 20, you know, the hangar type things we're now used to. I mean, the biggest venue in Glasgow now is 12,000, the Hydro. And, you know, I saw David Byrne in there a few years ago. It was absolutely amazing. But often they just leave me cold. It takes something really quite special to draw you into such a big shed, basically. I'm generally not into these huge, sterile kind of popcorn events, you know. I like a more of a theatre type, intimacy with the performer. Yeah. That's so. I had a great start. You know, very, very lucky in that respect.
Yeah, I remember going to my first few concerts. You know, the anticipation. You know, going in there. You know, you got your tickets. You know, and they've ripped it, and you go in and you get your seat or what have you, and you know, like you said, listening to the warm-up music.
It was also part of the ritual, wasn't it?
Right, it was. And then just getting.
What was your first concert?
My first concert, Chicago.
Chicago, right? That would be pretty impressive, I imagine. They would be solid outfit.
Yes, it was a great concert.
Yeah.
76. That was
76. Wow, amazing. Yeah. So couple of years ahead of me getting to the concert.
Yeah. I think age-wise too. I think I was born in '61. You?
62. I'm 62. Yeah, I just turned 60 this summer. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. How did that? How does that happen? But here we are. Yeah.
When is your birthday? When is your birthday?
July the 19th.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yeah.
Mine's 8 days before yours. So.
Wow. So just about a year and 8 days apart, sort of thing. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So we'll have a lot of shared the timing of those experiences. Yeah.
Yeah.
What music was, you were reacting to as you went through your teenage years and what have you, and early memories of the Beatles and all sorts of things.
Oh, sure. Yeah. All that's coming back.
Mm.
What about what age did you start playing guitar?
Well, when my friend suggested we start a band, I think I was 15. So you could say I attempted to learn then. There was one guy who in the band who was a big Kiss fan, as it turned out. He had a rudimentary grasp of bar chords. Mm-hmm. So he gave us a slight start to any kind of basic level of competence. But it took a couple of years. We were very fortunate in that when Friends Again really properly got started a couple of years down the line so it'd be sort of 17, 18 by this time. The guy, Neil, who played bass, Neil Cunningham, his mother had this old outbuilding. It's like an old stable, I think, beside the house. And we were extremely fortunate with hindsight. I didn't realize at the time, but we had the free use of this rehearsal facility. Well, rehearsal facility. It was a kind of disused barn, we very crudely jet rocked, plasterboarded the walls with some crude insulation and things. But we couldn't have done the amount of rehearsing that we did if we hadn't had that, and that gave us a great start point to, learn a decent level of playing and things.
Did you at this point were you thinking at all about maybe music as a career, or were you just like learning to play? And
I think the fantasy was there. Where I think we were at a stage where the fantasy was very powerful, but I think I didn't think I really believed that it was possible. But you're just an age where you just go for it, because you're just in the moment, and you're not taking responsibility for some great plan. I did go to university for a year when I was 18. I studied English, but my heart wasn't really in it, and already the band was just starting to get enough of we're getting a little bit of local radio and local press, and I just didn't feel what the university was for me, so I dropped out of that. Much to my parents' horror, of course, but we were lucky. The next year was a bit touch and go, because it was about a year before we got a publishing deal. We at least got an advance on our songs, and then maybe 6 months after that, we got a record deal with Phonogram, but a major label. So we were sort of up and running. It's never plain sailing, but by that point, it became evident that it was a possibility.
Well, yeah. Backing up just a bit, you early on you played a gig or two with a couple of members of Bluebells, future Bluebells.
That's exactly right. Yeah, our rehearsal stable, they had one almost the same, about 5 minutes walk away. Same setup, the house, and these are old Victorian stone houses, and they presumably had horses back in the day. So the Bluebells, who were musically they were called Raw Deal at that time, and the McCluskey brothers, David and Ken, and they were quite a sharp punk band compared to us. They were good. They could play a bit. So there was that little bit of a local rivalry, and as things evolved, they ended up being signed to basically the same major label, or within the same building. I think they were London Records, we were Phonogram, but it was all under Polygram or something. so yeah, the rivalry continued in a nice way. In fact, we ended up touring together and things when the Bluebells had a hits record over here, Young at Heart, and we did a nice tour of the UK. I see. Yeah, that was funny that there was, and even to this day, you know, we're still. My friend Paul is just mixing and mastering the first Bluebells record for 30 odd years, whatever it is. They've made a new record.
Is that right?
Yeah, off
So
the back of the reissue of the Sisters album.
Sisters.
They had such fun with it, and they were like, okay, let's do a new record then.
Yeah.
It's more or less done.
Right. Well, speaking of hearing songs, and I know what was a radio program or show that you would listen to?
Well, I was a big John Peel.
Right,
Peel on the BBC, was it radio? I think it was Radio 1, yeah, 10 o'clock at night.
Right.
Yeah, religiously, around about 77. That's probably my favorite year in my memory, because that's when I really got the bug for music, and listening to John Peel on the headphones, 10 to midnight. It was a great mix of, he would play some Zeppelin, but then he would play the Undertones or the Fall, or, you know, Ivor Cutler. It was such an eccentric mixture of things.
Yeah, he really he helped give a lot of bands a start too. I mean, he really helped jumpstart. Yeah, and you guys did a Peel session, right?
You know, we didn't do Peel. We did 2 or 3 Radio 1 sessions. There was another guy called Kid Jensen.
Okay,
he was Canadian, but he was Radio 1. We did several sessions for him and 1 or 2 other guys. Peel, we didn't do a Peel session. That's a shame, you know. But I mean, I loved the experience of going to the BBC studios in Maida Vale, which again, you look back and realize, wow, you know, I was lucky enough to go to Abbey Road on a couple of occasions as well to do some mixing and mastering. And you know, I'd sort of appreciated it at the time, but it's only when you look back you think, those are really iconic spaces. The things that happened there. In fact, a similar experience that I only found out about a year or 2 ago was we friends again mixed down in a place called Rockfield in South Wales. And I kind of think I vaguely knew that Queen had recorded there, but I remember sitting messing about in this lovely old Bosendorfer grand piano. And it's only about a year ago I found out that, as far as I'm aware, Freddie Mercury, that's the piano in Bohemian Rhapsody, which is like, kind of a little bit mind-blowing. And you know, I did it partly there and partly in London, but I think it was that piano. I thought, I was sat messing around in this thing for hours, which was great, but how much greater would it be to think, this is the Bohemian Rhapsody piano.
Right. I would be like, should I even touch it? Should I?
Yes. There's those little funny things where you bump into someone in the lift at the record company, or you know, Bob Geldof or the guys from U2 or something, and it just seemed like partly like bumping into the cleaner or something. You know, it was sort of the norm. But you look back, did that really happen? And to be sitting in Abbey Road, you know, and all the music history that was made in that place.
Well, I would speaking of brought up about the listening to the radio. We had a show here on Sunday nights, Rock and Roll Alternative, in 82 is really when I started listening to 82, 83. And I would always tape the show, you know, on my cassette.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Right. And you know, especially the songs that I liked. And most of them, the DJ would announce who it was. Well, there's this one song that I never heard. It was in the middle of a you know, a set or something, but he never said who it was, or I didn't get it. So years later, speaking of the Bluebells, I picked up import of their greatest hits or best of, and listening to it, and a song Holland, you know, that song HOLLA.
That was the song. Yeah,
that was that song, great song. And I was like, wow. And this was years later. It's like, now I know the song. Now I know.
Yeah, that's a nice tie-in. That's
yeah. So anyway, back to what we were talking about. So talk about the formation of Friends again. How you guys?
Yeah, well, the core lineup came together at our what we call secondary school. So we were like 15, 16, and they had a thing in the music class, and the music class, 90% of the people weren't that into learning an instrument. So what they did was I think in despair, the music teachers would say, okay, on Fridays, you get to bring a record in. So this became very competitive. You know, someone would turn up with ELP, but someone would try and find the most offensive punk Sex Pistols or something. If there's a few swear words, all the better, to try and shock the teacher. But there's this culture of people bringing records into school, and often in see-through bags, so that your plastic bag had to be see-through, so that you were really quite performative about, well, I've got the latest kids album or something. So there's a big guy Neil that I knew, was because of the record he was carrying. I said, oh, can I borrow that? Because that was a thing you traded and taped each other's records. Home taping is killing music, but yeah, so I said, oh, can I borrow that, and you can borrow this, and we suddenly became quite friendly through that thing. And then my friend Paul, the keyboard player, same sort of thing. I think not only did he have a interesting record, at one point we saw him walking down the local high street with a little keyboard under his arm.
Is that right?
We were like, we need a keyboard player. And I'd been at school with Paul for years, and since we were like the same school, 5-6 years of age, so knew each other, but we're always moving in different circles until that moment. Oh, would you like to join a band? Oh yeah. I mean, Paul couldn't play; he had the keyboard. Luckily, it was a monophonic synthesizer, so you only had to play one note at a time. But at that point, things like the early some of the new wave was becoming more electronic. Human League, and I think Gary Newman might have been starting to emerge. So yeah, he joined in. So it was a school band. Pal was at school really, and we had a variety of drummers locally. But I guess the big breakthrough was we went through a few guitarists, but then this guy James Grant, who became the serious guitarist with the band, he was a friend of a friend, and he came to see us live just as we lost one guitarist. We kind of fell out after a gig, and James happened to be at the gig, and the mutual friend said, well, this guy James is looking for a band. He saw you play. Maybe that will work. And it did. He was technically on a whole other level to the rest of us. He brought us all up quite considerably. So I think it was the marriage of the two things. He was a guy who had done the classics, sitting in his room, spending hours and days and weeks and months practicing his craft. Eagles, Zeppelin, you name it. It's quite an Americana type background, but he really could. I mean, he's a great player, and he was an amazingly good player for his age. As good as he is now, he was like always that good. Is one of those annoyingly talented guys. He had put some serious time in. So when he joined, it was like, wow, this guy's he's phenomenal. So he joined, and he was the Friends Again guitarist for what I guess 82 to 84, and on all the recordings, the major label recordings and things. So that's how it came about.
Well, how did you guys come to be signed with Phonogram?
Again, timing was lucky, because there was a lot of interest in the Scottish and the Glasgow music scene from a very London-centric industry, because of the success of things like Orange Juice and Aztec Camera.
Yes.
There's suddenly some Scottish things. The postcard records scene made a real mark on the wider scene, and it meant that A&R men were suddenly visiting, and we had a good friend. Again, I think he was a cousin of the Bluebells, actually, so very kind of incestuous. We had this guy John Quigley who said, "I'll manage you." He was our age, but he had incredible confidence. Some people have to, some people would call it, a real bullshitter, but it worked. So I can manage this. And he was one of these guys who could talk himself into a situation. And he had a couple of slightly older sisters who were living in London. So he would go down with the demo tapes and sleep in their place at Tufnell Park, but go out and hang out in the Camden Palace with all these guys like Boy George and Steve Strange and the new romantic scene that was kicking off, sort of, I guess, 1980. We're in that sort of period, and he was. I now look back and say, wow, the guy was a genius, because he'd be saying to Boy George, yeah, I'm doing this Friends Again thing. So and so wants to produce it. Now that was just classic. So Boy George would say, some biggish name producer or someone from that scene. Yes, Baggers, Spandau, Gary Kemp wants to co-write with the band. It was going on, but so suddenly, Boy George loves the band. So he had that knack of PR spin, and he generated some kind of publishing interest, and the publisher came up to see us live and quite quickly signed a deal. And a similar story with the A&R guys. We did a gig in Glasgow. He brought Phonogram up and various other record companies. Then we went down to see them. But at the gig that they really convinced them, we made sure we had quite a few of our friends and girlfriends and things, like really kind of, behaving like crazed fans, and they fell for it. Yeah, so we again the major deal fell into our laps quite easily, but partly because there was so many things getting signed around the Glasgow scene and Edinburgh too.
Right. Well, you mentioned that postcard scene, and
postcard scene is a big thing. I think that it was a bit like a mini version of punk for Scottish musicians, because it suddenly gave you the confidence that, well, hang on, maybe there's a bigger world out there that would like to hear this music. It was a big leap. Yeah. I mean, there had been successful things, some, your Jerry Rafferty's and all sorts of things that had success. Average White Band. I mean, these were big. Yeah, they were big in their way, but this as a sort of do-it-yourself scene. I think there was a sense that those bands really had to go to London or indeed America to make it. There was a sense of being able to make it. I think the same thing happened in Liverpool and Manchester. Right. Through the same period, a lot of great stuff coming out of there.
Right. You mentioned Jerry Rafferty, one of my favorites.
Yeah.
And Average White Band.
Talented guys,
Are you familiar with Sutherland Brothers and Quiver?
Yes, I am. Yeah. I can't quite remember all the lineage of that band, but yeah, they were very much a couple of big records.
Country rock. I did a written interview with Gavin Sutherland, one of the surviving members, but in that interview we talked about it seemed like Scottish bands and singers had a knack of covering or sounding American. I know there was the heavy influence from over here. It's like, especially like Average White Band, I know people that have heard them, it's like, really, that's a Scottish band?
That's a very strong example of that. That really, they nailed that certain sound. Again, they're a good example of a band. They left me a little bit cold at the time, but now I really appreciate how good they were. I wasn't quite at the right age to be. It was too laid back for me or something. Too smooth, too polished. A bit like Steely Dan. I find that a little bit too polished for me, but I've grown to appreciate it. But there's a lot of Scottish things like that. You can go back to the 60s where Donovan did well. Right. I know there's this sort of embarrassing footage in the Bob Dylan movie where Donovan looks a little bit silly because he's like the ultimate hanger-on, and Bob Dylan, it's so appallingly puts him down. It's great footage, but I got to feel for Donovan a bit. In fact, about 2 or 3 years ago, we did a radio session, myself, James Grant, and it was one of those things. At the end of the evening, they brought all the artists together, and the other artist was Donovan. So I ended up, we sang not Yellow Submarine, Mellow Yellow with Donovan. So claim to fame time. It was the actual live performance was an absolute shambles, but I'll treasure the memory of the rehearsal in the little green room, because that was just magic. It was like suddenly Donovan walked in like, right, wait, I'm told we're all going to get together and do Let's Learn Mellow Yellow. So we all sat in there going, shit, we all sitting playing with Donovan. My dad had this guy's record. That was a lovely moment.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, he's a Glasgow guy. He's a little guy from Glasgow, yeah.
yeah, bridging that generation gap, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Even one of James Grant's solo albums, and I can't recall the title, but it sounds very Americana as well.
Yeah, I think it's true to say James probably was.
Yeah.
I mean, my Americana came more from Velvet Underground, Iggy Pop, television, Talking Heads.
Oh yeah.
James definitely came from more Steely Dan,
Mhm.
Eagles. He would sit and play Eagles tunes and things, which again, I've come to absolutely appreciate, but it certainly was not my background at that time. I was more a kind of East Coast Americana thing, the cool things as far as I was concerned. The things the NME said it was okay to like,
The NME, right?
Yeah.
Well, talk about the name. Who came up with the name The Friends Again? How did
it was initially, I think it was a possible song title, and we were struggling a bit. We'd had various terrible names, or we called the Craniums, Acquire Holy, which was very much a Joy Division phase we were going through, and and then we started to move into more of this, Americana, the jangly thing, the postcard scene. So we needed a name that was lighter, and I remember talking to Bobby Bluebell. I'll blame him, I'll give him the credit, but we said, yeah, we've got this song Friends Again, and we're maybe going to call the band Friends Again. He was like, yeah, brilliant, absolutely love it, go for it. So he gave it the seal of approval, and there we go, we stuck with it. So that was it, just a song title.
So we'll give him credit for it.
We'll give him credit. Well, he'll take the credit anyway, so we miss Bobby. Yeah, brilliant guy. We'll give him a credit for all. He was another figure who was quite pivotal because he had an amazing self-belief, and still to this day he still does. He's done very well with writing for people like Texas, and he gets a lot of co-writing work, and he's been a successful musician, and he's got that amazing self-belief. I mean, there's a great story. We shared a manager, a guy called Mark Wilson, who's now, here we go again, but he's now Paul's brother-in-law. But Mark Wilson managed the Bluebells, managed Orange Juice at one time, managed Friends Again, and Mark told me the story recently that he was in a nightclub in London this is probably in the mid-80s, just when the Bluebells are starting to pick up, and he was with a friend. They turned around and they saw Bobby Bluebell talking to Siobhan from Bananarama, who was regarded as one of the most beautiful, desirable 80s pop star women of the time. His friend sort of laughingly said, "Oh, Bobby Bluebell's chatting up Siobhan," and Mark was like, "Well, you may laugh, but would you care to make a bet what's going to unfold here?" They ended up making a bet for £10. 10 minutes later, sure enough, Bobby Bluebell was walking out of the nightclub, kind of arm in arm with Siobhan, and they had a relationship for about a year after that. It's like, this guy could talk. I think the first, he's not a classic sort of Hollywood leading man, but he has the charm. He has the charm.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I remember Bananarama first seeing images of them. I was like, wow, they've got the look. They
had a great look. Yeah. The music was often hit and miss, but they had some good singles. But boy, they had the look. Yeah, it was a great image.
They're good harmonizing though.
Oh yeah.
Okay, let's jump to the first single, "Honey at the Core."
Yeah,
it was pretty well received, right?
It was, yeah. Some really good reviews there. It came together. It was quite an early song for us, that in terms of the things, our own songs. I remember just walking home one night down the famous Sauchiehall Hall Street in Glasgow, and the little refrain, the chorus, kind of came to me as often good choruses and things do, is just sort of one line followed the other. I suddenly, by the time I got home, I had the chorus, and it seemed like an obvious choice for the first, like, an independent single on the Moon Boot record. I think the record company had given us a budget to make the record, but they said, okay, well, it's better that you put it out independently, though they had the first option to pick us up I think that was the deal, that they gave us probably 500 quid or something to make the record. And because it got that good reception, that was part of them saying, okay, let's move to the next phase. We want to sign you to an album deal. And, they paid, when you look back, it was a reasonable advance that we could live on for a year or two. We paid off our debts on musical equipment that we'd been buying up on finance agreements and things. The whole thing suddenly came together. So the good reviews helped a lot at that stage.
Good. Got you going. Get the
Yeah, and of course, you're 18, 19, 20. You need a bit of affirmation to give you. You might be going in the right direction. That someone out there might like this.
Like, well, that's always. How did you recall the listener, the fan out there? Did you get any response about that single coming back?
Yeah, I think response is slower to come back because the channels weren't available then. It strikes me looking back, things were very, very slow.
Right.
Friends Again as an entirety, it's only maybe a few years after we broke up that I realized we'd made any kind of progress or impact. Here we are decades later talking about the band and the albums being reissued and things. So it's kind of ticked over on the margins of all these things that are, the little cults here and there, things on the margins that have sustained a bit of interest over the years. But at the time, I guess because we were in the bubble of the 80s bubble of all that really mattered was having a big hit single, which you then launched your album. We never, none of the singles did well enough. They just got to the bottom of the charts, but never into the top 40. And so there was a sense of failure because we hadn't lived up to what the record company had pitched. We paid you in advance, and they'd ran up, say several £100,000 worth of recording costs, which of course was on our tab to be recouped. But so it's a sense of you're pitching, okay, well, this needs to sell 500,000 or 1 million albums to get all the money back, whatever that figure was. I know it was never reached. But, so there was a kind of more of a sense of failure. And of course, you don't have, when you're that age, you don't have that much to gauge what is failure or how relative things are. But it was heartening as the years went past, even a few years after the band broke up, that you suddenly would pick up on things like, oh yeah, this, it had been a bigger thing. I think people in our local community and sort of glad, they're sort of proud of people who had done well, had made any kind of impact, and that was really quite heartening and a nice thing to feel part of.
Right. Well, I think you created your own niche, no matter how big.
Well, that's it, and I think the way I look at it now, for about now decades long of being in and around making music, taking time out of music, you definitely feel very comfortable with the notion of not being like Adele level or something. It was that sort of ridiculous level of success. I really don't mind, Friends Again do a couple of 5,000 vinyl records around the world and people are enjoying it, and then everyone is just, if they want, they can get it on Spotify. I think that it appeals to me less and less, this sort of gargantuan factory machine-like thing of successful, someone like Madonna level. I find it very the opposite of appealing, unappealing. Yeah, it doesn't do it for me. I've always liked things that are a little bit esoteric and on the margins in your own niche. Yeah.
I think things can become too big. And,
and it loses any kind of magic. I think people like to feel it's a little bit special.
Right.
To them, that maybe you're part of a smaller club. But when things become this sort of mass market, I don't know, you often feel that the people that go to the very biggest shows, there's a certain level that's beyond, it's a mass consumerist type project. I don't know, it's the same in film and things. When something's so big, there's people that go to one film in 5 years, and that's that certain thing. You know, it's like, I mean, I'm not into these Marvel things, the fantasy type things. I'm not the demographic, but it's that sort of, why would you go to that? You know, it's just all about mass consumerism.
It really is.
Where's the artistry? Where's the mystery? Where's the intrigue?
And when is enough money enough?
No. Wow, that's a whole sort of existential philosophical question. The world we live in. Yeah, that's probably the biggie, isn't it? You know, when are certain people going to be satisfied with what they have? You know, and there's, you always feel you'd be depriving someone else of something if you've got that much. You know,
mathematics of it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, we mentioned earlier about the whole vinyl resurgence, and I know one of the things that caused a problem for vinyl capacity was when Adele, they pressed like 500,000 vinyl records, or they needed to. And I don't think in the end they sold them, but that was kind of sad, because all these small indie guys had saved vinyl, and their capacity of doing a couple of thousand of this and a couple of thousand of that. Suddenly Adele, oh, we're all doing vinyl now. We want 500,000 made. So that sucked capacity just bone dry, you know, and it really messed up the schedule. And okay, did they sell? Who cares? But does the world really need 500,000 pieces of black vinyl, or whatever color of vinyl? Adele, this ultimately is probably just going to be gathering dust in many, many cases. I always like to make the comparison with the Mamma Mia DVD. Now, I enjoyed that film as much as the next person, and I probably bought my mum a copy for Christmas, but there must be about like 30 million copies of that DVD, and we don't need that. You know, it's sort of,
don't need that many.
It's excess. It's pure excess.
Excess. Yeah, going to an excess.
To what end? And it's entirely removed from the artistry. As I think that's the thing.
Right. It's I think it's out of touch with reality. You know. I
mean,
that's part of adulation and adoration. And
yeah.
But going back to the second single, Sun-Kissed.
Yeah.
I like the new version, the quote unquote new version on that EP.
Yeah.
You know, with that sunny keyboard break in the middle of the
song. Yeah, that's good. You know, you really put me through my paces here, because there was a recent confusion with Sun-Kissed, because there were several versions. Right. And Paul, in doing this album, putting together the master for the vinyl, Paul sent me it over, and I was like, Sun-Kissed, I think it was the second track on the first side, or second or third track, but I was really confused as to what I was hearing, and I had to. Luckily, Paul has all the masters. He's finally he made sense of it all in the end, but it was quite tricky. So when you describe that, I can hear the keyboard you're talking about, but I couldn't put a name to what version that is. You said to you when I was mild sweat breaking out. I don't know the answer, but yeah, I feel like that keyboard. Yeah, I remember being mildly a bit disappointed with that as the second single. I thought the producer Bob Sargent, who sadly passed away last year, and a lovely guy. I generally loved working with him. But that particular single, I think it was the first thing we did with him, Sun-Kissed. I seemed to want to make everything too clinical, too straight. Okay. I mean, so some of the other versions are much quirkier and much livelier, and had a lot of energy about them. So I didn't particularly like the original single version. I thought it was the drums were sort of, everything had to be absolutely on the money, you know, and too clinical, that very 80s thing. But it's quite a quirky pop song. I like the song, and hopefully if Paul's done his job correctly, this is the correct version of this album. We shall see when the test pressings arrive. But
well now, State of Art.
Yeah,
that's my favorite Friends Again track.
And yeah,
sure a lot of fans out there.
Yeah, probably mine too overall. Yeah.
That's the one I always go back to listen to.
Yeah. Well, thank you. So that's great to hear. Well, it's another Bobby Bluebell moment. I remember him. We used to go to a bar, a real music bar in Glasgow called the Rock Garden. The Clash played there and things like that as a sort of informal pickup session. So it's a legendary small bar, orange juice, you know, Claire Grogan from Altered Images was working behind the bar. It had all these tie-ins. So that's where all those musos would go. And it's kind of like, like 18, 19-year-old guys. But I remember Bobby Bluebell saying to me, I've just heard the Friends Again demo. That song, State of Art, that's your pension. Now, and that he was wrong, but the sentiment was correct. He was very, very, that's a great song. It's a great song.
Yeah.
And that was hugely encouraging because he was already that little bit further down the track. He'd think he'd signed a publishing deal. He seemed to know what he was talking about, and to single that song out, I thought, well, maybe there's something in this, and even to this day, I find it very gratifying that James Grant will often include it in his live solo shows.
Okay.
And it's just lovely that the song has this other life.
Yeah.
And I've occasionally covered it myself in recent shows and things. It's lovely that something that was written when I was at university in that first year, instead of paying attention, I was scribbling out the lyrics to State of Art, here we are all these years later.
You know what I say, and I've interviewed some really elderly guys. If you looked at the channel, some late 60s, early 70s, and they're surprised. A lot of them, like, how did you find out about me, or who would still be interested in this after 50 something years, or what?
Yeah.
And I say, well, good music, quality music, is really timeless. It doesn't matter. A lot of younger people are finding out about these bands now, through various artist compilations, things like that.
Yeah.
Yourself, I'm sure that you've got some younger, audiences now,
Yeah.
But, it's like it's going to carry on. It's going to reach people. Quality music is going to.
I hope so. Yeah, I think you're right. I see that in other bands that I love. I think there's also the thing of, that you, short of a time machine, you can't go back.
Right.
You're done then. It's like the 60s, the classic thing, all the stuff that that's it. We can't add to that canon of what was made in the 60s, the 70s. What exists. So it's kind of magical to go back, and if a performance or a song was captured in that moment, and it's just, there's something magical about it. I mean, the T-Rex record you were mentioning earlier, that's just a moment in time that is absolutely magic. When someone like Mark Bolan was discovering that he could do it, and there's that amazing energy you detect. I think we sort of subliminally aware of it as we enjoy a record. It's wow, he was discovering himself for his own abilities. And I think that kind of magic permeates the classic canon, and sure, it still happens now. There's obviously, it's so much easier to make records or recordings now that maybe there's a massive glut when in 20 years people come back to this period, there's more of it. I would imagine there's just going to be so much more of it to pick your way through.
Right. I think so too.
Yeah.
Good. Another track off of that album, South of Love.
Yeah.
You guys seem to be moving a little bit away from the funky sound.
Yeah.
But I like James's guitar on that one though.
Yeah, that's a good track. Yeah, that was probably one of the later songs, later additions to our bunch of songs. So that would probably explain the slight shift in, because the album was recorded over, I think we definitely started in '83 when we did the State of Art sessions in Sunkist. And as I say, they were holding on for this hit record that never came. So we continued to record into '84, and South of Love was definitely quite a late addition. And although James and I had done a lot of co-writing, I think that was one of the first ones that he really brought to the table as 70-80% complete. It was a real James song. So I think there's quite a strong, there's a little bit of sort of Neil Young about some of the lyrics in that. There is a town, it's sort of just south of Love. There is a town near, is it somewhere in Ontario or something? But yeah, it's quite close to a Neil Young line. But that could explain it, the period, and the fact it was really essentially a James composition. And we just added pieces at the last minute. But
Yeah, it's an effective song.
Yeah,
On,
yeah.
on the album Trapped and Unwrapped, there's a couple of tracks that I always enjoy. Swallows in
Cause
the
of the
Rain.
Rain. Again, that came from that later period, and we had the interesting experience of working with Tom Verlaine producing the track, who was a legend to us from television. His television, Marquee Moon, all that amazing stuff. It was a good experience. He was a very chilly fellow, which he was quite an austere character.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't that much older than us, I suppose. I think maybe he'd been in his late 20s. We were in our early 20s. And so we were dangerously close to kind of fanboys, we were kind of this legendary figure. But to him, it was just really a job. And I think I think it's fair to say that kind of a lot of personal demons he was working through. I'm not quite sure if it was drink or drugs or something, but it was a challenging thing to be in that work environment. But I'm glad it happened, and I think the track turned out well. Swallows in the Rain is a good, it was a successful outcome from a tricky experience. And having been such big fans, it's obviously nice to work with one of your heroes. However, it played out, of course, the fantasy is you're sort of suddenly having a pint with them like a couple of times a year after that. I mean, none of that ever happened and never was going to happen. But it was a good, interesting learning curve.
I like the keyboards in that one as the prominent instrument. I like.
Yeah, Paul did really well in that. Yeah, it's good. It's got an interesting guitar solo as well. That was very much Tom Verlaine doing some weird kind of Eno-esque things with amplifiers and Leslie cabinets and stuff. But it was good. It was, again, looking back, you're very fortunate not only to work with interesting producers, but the studio time that was available to us in Rack Studios in North London was just amazing. The kind of the old school quality of all the equipment, and the engineers were superb. The townhouse where we worked with Verlaine in West London, again, you sort of took it for granted because you were just in that bubble in the moment. But to afford those things now, it's just, I can't imagine a scenario where I could kind of get back there, which is okay. It's you just do it other ways. I've got a nice setup here with expensive mics, but
I was going to say, I can see that behind you.
Yeah, nice Neumann and various other ones tucked in boxes. Mrs. Thompson doesn't necessarily. Boys in the toy. Yeah, it's all good. It's amazing what you can get in your computer, isn't it? Then I just work on Logic Pro. It's extraordinary. There's probably 100 times the power of some of those studios we were in terms of effects and plugins and all this stuff. It's just a whole new world. But yeah.
Any memorable gigs or shows as Friends Again?
Oh, well, I certainly recall we did a residency at the famous Marquee Club in London, Wardour Street, and that was pretty good. Because you had people like Martin Offler showing up, and Noddy Holder, Lemmy from Motorhead came every, and then we went back to the famous rock and roll hotel called the Columbia in West London. It's a big hangout after these shows, and that was memorable. Yeah, that was great fun, and you definitely felt we were close to making some kind of breakthrough. We were becoming a proper band, and it didn't. It kind of fell apart just before it happened, and it quite possibly never would have happened in that sense. But those are memorable shows.
Yeah, you want to talk a little bit about that? Why James decided to leave the band? And
I think it's totally understandable. And that he was getting he more than anyone really craved a commercial validation. I mean, he felt the lack of a commercial breakthrough. I think it got to him in a way it didn't get to me. I was probably secretly kind of a little bit pleased to avoid the scrutiny or the tension. It's always been a strange trade-off for me that having too much success would lead you into a world that I wasn't comfortable in. But James, I think, was closer to the opposite at that time anyway. I think his opinions have changed a lot since then. And also, as well as wanting the commercial success, he was probably writing more and more and had a strong voice, is great, so he just wanted to do his own stuff.
Mhm.
And that led to, there's a little bit of a bolt from the blue at the time, but I think he'd been building up in his head for months.
Right.
But it was just a phone call, and it was like, yeah, it's over type of call. And so a little bit shocking at the time.
Right.
But hindsight, I could, sense it. Well, I should have seen that coming. It's just the sheer lack of, again, tying in with what I said earlier, we didn't feel we were getting further than we felt, but it wasn't far enough to satisfy. James really needed that validation and sense of a breakthrough, which when they went on to form Love and Money, immediately, when they just were doing it, they came that much closer to getting a serious commercial breakthrough. And that was very much the objective, particularly on their early recordings, that enough of this jangly stuff, we're going to actually hit the commercial mainstream and really knock them for six, And they almost pulled it off. They almost pulled it off.
Yeah. I think you're right. Some of their earlier stuff is good, is really good quality.
Yeah, they were kind of, it was, I mean, the guy from Duran Duran produced the first single, the Candy Bar Express, and that was very much kind of power station driving drums and loud and a big MTV friendly video and everything. So they, good on them. They went for it, and they almost pulled it off. So it was kind of sad. I think it was a difficult period for me because it had been pals from school,
Mm-hmm.
Paul and Neil. To lose that overnight was tricky to sort of rebuild. I think that was a bit of a blow to my confidence, but creatively it was probably helpful in that I went away and licked my wounds and rebuilt, and
Right.
fortunately got a deal for myself with Go Discs, who had Billy Bragg and the House Martins at that time, and I managed to move on, pick myself up, move on, and the kind of happy ending is, I worked with James off and on for quite a number of years. He helped out on the first Bathers album, and he helped out on other subsequent albums. We played live together. So if the friendship and respect survived beyond the breakup of the band, as it should be, I think. And Paul McGeechan, the keyboard player and school friend, we're still making music to this day. He's got a project called Starless. I don't know if you've heard it. They're just trying to put the third album together now. And the first albums were really good. They had Paul Buchanan from Blue Nile and kind of a guest list of singers. And I was one of I co-wrote a couple of songs and sang some. And I've been just writing for his third album. It's been a bit of gave him 5 options, which is good. I suddenly got into a bit of a writing frenzy, which is always to be treasured when it happens. So it's all good, and that's really it's a nice kind of completion of the circle to be working with a school pal who we made music together in the late 70s and 80s, and here we are over this last 4 or 5 years recording again and doing live gigs together. That's nice.
Like you said, that you remain close and friends and still work. Because in so many cases, breakup is a breakup, and it's
so much acrimony around these things at times. But you see these examples. I don't understand. Obviously things can happen, but in this case, there was no reason to become acrimonious about it. So.
Right. Well, you did bounce back, like you mentioned, with getting the solo deal with Go Discs.
Yeah.
And you set out to record as the Bathers. Now, the name was inspired by your affinity for French Impressionist paintings. Is that right?
Yeah. When I was in that licking the wounds phase after Friends Again, one of the things I did was I started buying one of these magazines that you bought one a week, and you built up this big colossal kind of library of and it was, a lot of it was the French Impressionists was one of the first editions, and there was Manet, and then there was Renoir and all this, and I just became fascinated with that world. And I also I'd always been quite a keen reader, and I decided to embark upon one of the longest novels in the language, in any language, Marcel Proust, The Remembrance of Things Past as It Is in English, and I absolutely loved that. And that fed into my whole kind of worldview in artistic terms. and the French paintings seem to. There was the theme, the bathers, kept coming up in some of these paintings, and I just thought, yeah, that will do that. I want to be living in one of those paintings. That looks so beautiful,
right?
and esoteric.
Yeah.
And
It
so
is.
yeah,
It is.
that stuck.
It is interesting how the subject that there were so many of those, bathing.
Yeah. There's a lot of people say, "Oh, is it Cézanne, the bathers at Asnières?" I was like, no, yeah, I know that painting, but no, it wasn't one specific painting. It was more the theme that kept coming up, and you could point to any number of
Right.
yeah, of these pictures. Yeah, so that was the start point, and I was very fortunate. I got the deal with Go Discs for the first album, which again is finally going to be reissued this year. We finally got the legal side cleared to license it. It was tricky. I think there's an issue to do with lost contracts and lost tapes and God knows what, but it's all been resolved now. So that should be coming out very, very soon. As soon as it can be pressed, basically. And from there, I then got a deal with Island Records for the second Bathers record. So I had a good run. And then from there, I did 3 records with a German independent called Marina Records. So yeah, it's a very interesting journey. This new Bathers record, which I've been threatening to release for a number of years, but I've kept tweaking it. But it is absolutely, it's a fraction away from being finished. So that will definitely be out in the new year, the next year. So it's looking like a busy sort of period.
Busy period. Was Marina also had Pearl Fishers, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Pearl Fishers.
Yeah, another.
I love the Pearl Fishers, and Davy Scott, the main man, is such a lovely guy.
Yeah.
It's quite a tight scene over here because Davy Scott, the main man, is basically Paul's boss. They work in a kind of music. University of West of Scotland has a sound production music degree course, and Paul is one of the senior lecturers there, and Davy is he's the senior lecturer. So it's all very, they've diversified into using their talents to train a whole other generation of musicians and producers and what have you.
Wow, okay.
In fact, last night when I was out with Paul at a gig, I saw Paul talking to a guy, and I thought I bet that's one of Paul's young students. So Paul said, "Yeah, did you see that guy I was talking to?" Yeah. He was a student, and I thought he was going to say he left last year, because he looked to me about 23 years of age or something. But he said, "No, he's about 35. He managed Louis Capaldi." Now, Louis Capaldi had a, absolute mega hit. Was it someone like you or something, that massive hit?
Yeah.
Huge everywhere. I mean, so he said, yeah, he's basically made for life. He's not managing him anymore, but he is taking a percentage off the first Louis Capaldi album. Mm-hmm. He's living in LA, and okay, so you obviously did your job well. As a young student, he spotted Louis Capaldi was also on the course, and this guy spotted him and said, "Yeah, I think I can make something of this." And they certainly did. I mean, sold millions of records and downloads and all the rest of it.
I would say so.
Yeah. But Pearl Fishers, I love them. And Marina they just reissued the 3 Pearl Fishers album this summer, beautifully packaged. They did a wonderful job, as they did with the Bathers ones. Really stunning looking artwork. And
the artwork is top notch.
Yeah, it really is. So that's nice. I mean, to cut up to the present day, the big focus of attention, we've got a label here in Glasgow called Last Night from Glasgow. I don't know if you're aware of them, but they just reissued the Bluebells album, the Hipsway album, Trash Can Sinatras, which did really. They were big in America. They were.
That's one of my top bands.
Yeah. Yeah. Great bunch of guys. So those reissues have done incredibly well. I think they wildly exceeded their expectations. They were doing repressings, and so this label Last Night from Glasgow is just been fantastic for the local scene. Was that they're bringing on new bands, reissuing some of the older stuff. That's where the Friends Again record is going to come out, and the first Bathers, one of the Dogs in the Traffic, Love and Money, that was reissued on there. So it's a great kind of melting pot of the old and the new. They've got a lovely retail premise where they have live music. It's good for the scene. You know, it's there's a lot going on. And Glasgow is quite a big music city anyway for venues, and you know, despite the whole pandemic pressures,
Right.
we survived it, and the live scene is really back up and running again.
Well, do you have time to talk a little bit about the Bathers? I was
Yeah,
thinking
go for it. Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
a little bit about, did you, at that point, with the project, with the Bathers, excuse me, were you trying to distance yourself from Friends Again, with the chamber pop and your gruff voice?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I definitely. Yeah, particularly on the first and second albums, there was a sense of I wanted to make my own mark, and
right,
you know, probably the manifestation of the frustrations that I felt with, you know, we'd done Friends Again, and it didn't feel like it had
right,
really done anything, you know, at the time. So also reacting, there was a sort of reaction against what had once been fashionable, you know, the Scottish jangly bands, the postcard bands. There's a bit of a reaction come 84, 85, 86, with the press kicked back against that sort of sound. And I think, I felt kind of, I wanted to distance myself and start something new. And it is a sort of devil may care attitude as well. Like, I'm just going to make a record that pleases me, and you know, stuff them all. You know, it's I think I think on the second record, I was really into things like Rain Dogs by Tom Waits. So I wanted to kind of push my voice into strange areas that were very, very far removed from the Friends Again. Just, I guess it's experimenting with trying to find what you can do with your voice, particularly, and like many singers, it takes a while to feel in any way confident about you know, your own voice. I think as a younger musician, you're thinking, oh God, you know, what notes can I hit, or it becomes a sort of a technical inferiority thing, where actually you through doing music for a much longer period, it's more about sort of tone, attitude, atmosphere. What's the word? Integrity. You know, how you feel a performance, but also trying to measure that with not just thinking, well, I'll just kind of make it as loud, or as make the notes as long, you know, in any way trying to showboat. It's trying to bring all the important elements together in a sort of manageable, listenable. And you know, I think I've kind of got there over the last 5 or 10 years, that, you know your limitations, just work within them, but enjoy the things you can do and do them better and better. And you get to a sort of comfortable place. But those early records, you're just kind of trying to get into yourself. And particularly the Sweet Deceit record, which probably has my most extreme kind of vocal treatments, was I was going kind of full Tom Waits. And another thing I loved was Robbie Robertson, Somewhere Down the Crazy River. Loved all that kind of husky spoken little stories breaking out. And that was a bit of an influence. I loved Van Morris in the kind of Astro Weeks period. So the gruff Irishman, I maybe was trying to channel a bit of that, you know, the gruff Scotsman, you know, just pushing, experimenting with where it could go. But I think Sweet Deceit was an incredibly strong set of songs and a narrative arc. I think it's a great album, and some people who love it really love it, but it wasn't an easy sell to people. Particularly some people that might have been into Friends Again, you know, they had a choice of some Love and Money, who were more and more polished. And what's the other guy doing? Oh gee, what the heck? You know, it was the opposite of pop. It was quite, it took a bit to get into. It was probably arguably worth the effort, but it was not like an easy listen to break through into that world. But it definitely created a world which I like. And you know, I used to wander around at night listening to the rough mixes, or kind of writing the songs as I went, just round and round my bit of the West End of Glasgow. These beautiful old Victorian terraces. slightly down at heel in places, and the atmosphere. And the album was kind of representing my city and my the various kind of romantic misadventures, whatever you want to call it, relationship breakdowns, probably reflecting the breakdown of friends again. So it was a slightly chaotic, difficult period, but a wonderful period at the same time, as it was so creative, and I just channeled it all into something like the Sweet Deceit album.
Well, you mentioned Tom Waits, Paul Buchanan, of course. Your voice at times sounds like. Have you ever heard Bruce Springsteen? Have you ever heard anybody say your voice at times sounds
occasionally, yeah. I mean, I like that. I've got a sort of, no, I wouldn't say love-hate relationship. I never hate him. Sometimes some I do love him. I would never. Sometimes it leaves me a little bit. It goes too far into that, almost a caricature of blue collar America or something. Right. I mean, but yeah, he's brilliant. It's occasionally people have said there's a little overlap, and I would take that as a compliment. I think he's one of those guys. I actually went to see him on the probably the wrong tour, but the Born in the USA tour. Mm-hmm. We drove. He didn't play Scotland, I don't think. It might be. Anyway, I drove to Newcastle, which is 2 or 3 hours there, 2 or 3 hours back. But it was such a dispiriting experience, because It was Born in the USA, and he was like the other end of the soccer stadium, Newcastle United football ground. I just found it the opposite of what I like about a live performance, because everything was so far away. That distance. Right. What we were seeing bore no relation to what we were hearing. What we were hearing was kind of fuzzy and distant. It's just a soulless thing. That put me off him for a while, but yeah, he's done some fantastic stuff. Maybe we'd go and see him again, but no, not one of these great big corporate. And that was almost the apotheosis of the, that was his commercial, his massive. When he went from being a big and a slightly, but still a culty sort of overtone of a very cool musician who was absolutely heartfelt about what he was doing. A little bit like David Bowie in the Let's Dance period, where they kind of went for the commercial jugular, and something seemed to be lost, even temporarily. So that was my live experience with Springsteen, where I think he was in that little neverland between being cool and a little bit, being a bit too mainstream. Have you seen him live? Did you ever see the?
Yes, I did see him, and that was in the probably early 80s, maybe, or late 70s.
Yeah, a bit earlier than me. So you'd have probably seen more like the classic,
Right. His early stuff is really. But yeah, you're right. He definitely went over the top with the commercialism.
Yeah, and then he reined in it. I mean, somewhere in that period, of course, he did the Nebraska album, which is the opposite of a big. Right. He did it on a 4-track, and I did love that album. That's such a wistful, melancholy, beautiful atmosphere. The opposite of the pumped up, over the top 80s production.
He went a little bit back to his roots, I think.
He did, yeah. A lot of respect. He's someone you can't argue with. I mean, it's the classic sort of, like Bob Dylan. Again, I was sort of late coming to that, because he's like old hat. When I was 15, there was Bob Dylan. He's so yesterday, what do I know? But then you start to get Blood in the Tracks, Blonde on Blonde, Highway 61, and you think, this is incredible. Absolutely incredible. The guy, is an absolute legend. You can't, because he has his bad moments, but his deepest moments are just so it's just an extraordinary catalogue of stuff. You
can see why he was so influential.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, again, I would never go and see him live. I've heard so many, shall we say, mixed reports of, I don't think I would want to sully my great love and affection for what he's done. I think there's a lot of box ticking with people. Oh, I must see the Stones, or I must see Dylan, where they're still doing it. It just feels like you're not going to see anything like the classic version of this thing.
That's the point I have right there. Is if you don't see them, at their peak, then I don't want to see them, nowadays when they're what, 70, 80 years old, whatever,
Yeah, yeah,
so,
absolutely.
and
I
they're
mean,
going to be those huge arenas,
yeah,
like
it's
you.
not my thing. Maybe the closest that I recently saw that sort of almost bucked that trend in my mind was McCartney at Glastonbury at 80. I thought that this is, you fear the worst, but I thought he actually pulled that off really well. I mean, for an 80-year-old guy, for anyone to do a 2.5-hour set,
Right,
and what I saw of it, with some extraordinary moments in there. I mean, a great band, but I thought he sang well,
right.
and he was on there all the way through that thing. That's kind of, yeah, that bucked the trend because everything I'd seen maybe in recent years, it'd been kind of a little bit weak, especially at big events where he did, what was it? I think it might be like the Olympics opening ceremony or something. Did he do that one? And maybe
Well, I
his
think,
mic malfunctioned, but
yeah,
his voice was so weak and fragile. You're like, oh, please stop, just leave us with the legacy. But Glastonbury, to some extent, reversed that a little bit in my mind. That, oh, okay, fair play. Actually, that was a worthy set. He just put on there.
he sounded
Really good. Yeah.
Talk about talk about Bloomsday. What was Bloomsday?
Yeah, well, Bloomsday was an interesting period. I can't. You probably timed the question. Was that? I think there was an air of that being very much about, a bigger record company was suddenly involved again. The imperative was to make some commercially successful records. The two guys I was approached to make the band with were Lloyd, had played previously with Lloyd Cole and the Commotions, so I knew them from the Glasgow scene. They were sort of almost rivals. As Friends Again were coming up, Lloyd Cole suddenly came from behind everyone, and seemed like within weeks they had a deal. Then they had a hit single, then they had a hit record. I mean, deservedly, I think their first album was brilliant. I think that is a great, great record. I still listen to that and enjoy it. So when Lloyd broke the band up, Neil Clark, the guitarist, phenomenally talented, and co-wrote some great songs with Lloyd, and the drummer Stephen Irvin, they were looking to put something new together. So the Lloyd's manager, Derek McKillop, another Glasgow guy, said, look, well, why don't you talk to Chris Thomson? Okay, so I think they sent me a demo of a song called, well, it became Serene. Neil sent me a little demo, and I wrote a lyric and a vocal, which this song Serene, and sent it back to me. So yeah, I love it. Let's meet in London. So we met for a Mexican and lots of margarita, and then said, okay, yeah, shall we give this a go? And we were then, because they'd had a good level of success with Lloyd Cole and the Commotions. As Neil famously said on our first Bloomsday gig, which was in a nightclub in the northeast of Scotland, in front of about 200 teenagers who were like, "Who the hell are these old?" Who are like mid to late 20s or something, but they hadn't heard of us. And Neil would just turn to me as we were on and said, my last gig before this was Wembley Arena. Just kind of how the mighty have fallen. But that was a warm-up tour, but the plan was very much we would warm up, we'd make this record, and all the touchstones that I was hearing were in excess. Johnny, this huge band, She Drives Me Crazy, that massive record. The band offhand, but they were absolutely huge.
I know that's Fine Young Cannibals.
That's it. Well remembered. She Drives Me Crazy. Great record. Those are the sort of reference points of like, look, these are cool records, but they're really successful. They sound great, and they were selling millions. It was the time when things sold big numbers. Kick Inside and Excess. So these were the kind of reference points of what I was being given, and I was just nodding along, but it was another okay. This may happen. I was kind of uneasy about the idea, but we did some demos and very quickly got a deal with Island Records. And I turned to Island Records and said, okay, well, just so you're aware, I'm just finishing off this thing called Sweet Deceit as the Bather. I don't, I put, a lot of heart and soul into this, and I invested, $5,000 of my own money, which was quite significant at the time, to make the record. what do you think of this? And the managing director, a guy called Clive Banks, who was very music industry, velvet tour jacket, you know, with Dire Straits emblazoned and huge, you know, bubble perm thing. You know, he was a classic 80s record company guy. He said, "Oh yeah, send me the record, send me the record." So I sent him it down, and I got a phone call a few days later. I'm loving it. I'm loving it. You know, I think it was just baloney, you know, but he could see he just wanted to buy and take control of the record. So fair enough. He, you know, bought me out from my own record, and they released it on Ireland, which was very cool. It was great. So Sweet Deceit came out on Ireland, and in his mind, I think Bloomsday was the main event. It was designed to be the main event, and of course, it didn't really work out that way because we took about a year to actually make the record for Toonie. Again, great studios, access to the very best gear, the great engineering, the whole bit. But by the time the record was finished, there was some kind of recession kicked in. I can't remember the early, that'd be 1990. And there was, I don't know if there was some particular financial crash, but I know that the record industry really contracted.
Okay.
And there was a mass kind of dropping of the musicians and bands who were on the various rosters for the majors, and we were just culled like almost overnight. The Island Records, this managing director guy was sacked, our A&R man was sacked, new people came in, and they were like, okay, who have we got? You know, they looked at 50 bands and they just kind of ran the red pen through it all. Our record was finished. We had this A&R guy who was tasked, everyone was just lost heart. This guy was tasked with putting the record together from the recordings, and he said, right, I suggest we do this. Okay, fine. So it just kind of limped out in the end because the record company, they pressed the minimal amount contractually they had to, and it just died a death. There was no promotion, there was no nothing. And bizarrely, the Sweet Deceit record actually did quite well as a cult record. I think because I had a certain profile as friend, and it was probably arguably a more interesting record, a more a kind of indie record in that sense, and it sold far better. So yeah, as I said, the Bloomsday was a great experience. I loved working with Neil and Stephen, and to get a taste of that, the big record company experience again over that year of the big studios. It was good. It was, but it came to nothing. Actually, commercially, absolutely, it did zero, less than zero. Yeah.
What jump ahead a little bit. I want to hear about this. Elizabeth Fraser, Liz Fraser, was backing vocals on Sun Powder, the Sun Powder album.
That's right. Yeah.
How did this come about?
Well, there's a lovely thing again, and I'd always loved I think she's got one of the great voices from anywhere, but from the Scottish scene particularly. I did the first record with Marina Records called Lagoon Blues, and I got a phone call from a guy who worked at 4AD in London, who the Cocktails label at the time, or had been. I think they'd just left 4AD to go to Fontana. But this guy, Colin, called me and said, I said, I work at 4AD. And he'd been good friends of the Cocktails from their hometown of Grangemouth in the east of Scotland, quite an industrial sort of a grimy, gritty place. It was part of their whole backstory was that they were desperate to get out of this industrial hellscape. So Colin called me and said, look, I absolutely love the Lagoon Blues record. I think Liz might like it. I think one of those, well, would you mind if I passed it on to her? Which I'll absolutely go for it. So he did, and about a month later, he called and said, Liz loves the record. If you're doing anything else again in the future, would you consider asking her, is the Pope a Catholic type question?
Right. You don't have to ask.
Yeah, right. You don't have to ask me twice. So absolutely, I was, immensely flattered. So as Sun Powder, I think that we're into sort of 94 by that point, and I had a few things in mind that I thought maybe Liz's voice will work on this. So we I don't think we met. I think we just spoke on the phone a lot. I had a series of very, very eccentric phone conversations. I mean, she's just a lovely character, but she was really, really eccentric in a lovely, lovely way. And I said, so she came up to Edinburgh to the residential studio that I'd been using from friends again, the Bathers, a place called Palladium Studios on the edge of Edinburgh. It was a residential studio. It was just an old Victorian house that had been converted. And Liz luckily had worked there before as well. So she was very nervous, but that gave her some degree. She'd met the studio owner before. She'd met the engineer. She hadn't met me in person. We'd only spoken on the phone. So she came up and I was the 3 or 4 tracks that she sang on. She said, what I want to do is sing them live together in the booth, just do it as real as possible. So yeah, I think it was an amazing thing. I think when, as I say, one of the tracks, she sat in the booth, she said, I'll do that, I'll give this one a go myself. And then we sort of set the tape running, and the engineer and myself just sat there, and it just seemed to go on forever, but we just kept looping the tape back round and round and round, and nothing. And eventually there was a few little whoop, whoop. There's the odd noise. Is there a little bird in there or something? And then it took her about 15, 20 minutes just to kind of get her confidence. Amazing. Someone who's produced the work she has. She was really very, very nervy. Took her, but then once she warmed up, got into it, and she did a beautiful job. And then I think it was that stage she said, right, can we do something? I really wanted to do something in the room in the moment, and the track "The Angel on Ruskin" was the one we homed in on. And there's a section of sort of, I suppose you would call it the middle 8 towards the end of the song, where we do some strange things, and it's very effective. And it was just in the moment, and she's doing one thing and I'm kind of bouncing off it. So it's just a great experience. She's such an immense talent and a lovely person.
Right. I was going to ask you about that personally. You mentioned eccentric. Now this is just my impression. Maybe this is the impression that she wants to give off, but yeah. She seems fairly reticent. I don't know, is kind of reserved. In a group setting, she might be the quiet one.
Yeah, I think
am I far off or close? Or
I think you're pretty close. I think she got used to taking a back seat. She was, I think, naturally very, very shy,
right.
Lacking in confidence. Again, the town she came from, it wasn't somewhere that traditionally produced entertainers. In that sense, it was a gritty, hard East Coast. There's a massive sort of petroleum refinery thing that dominates the landscape. It's like something from a Bruce Springsteen song, actually. And this beautiful part of the Scottish coast, there's this sudden like hellscape rains up. At night it can look very beautiful. There's all these strange cooling towers and things. So she was from there. They couldn't get out fast enough. So I think her romantic partner and partner in the band, Robin Guthrie, I think he was the more dominating of the character. So he kind of did all the talking. Or I don't think he was particularly talkative either, because they were people that felt like fish out of water, coming from a small town from the small country, suddenly going to out to the big bad world. So they were very shy people. I think Liz kept that with her, and I think she found the Cocktoes, as the Cocktoes evolved, she broke up with Robin, but they were still in a band together. And I think it was very difficult. I think it was a huge amount of tension in the band, which didn't help her confidence. So by the time I did the sessions in '94, Robin was with a French partner by that point, and she was just desperate to try things out with the band. The Cocktoes were still going. I think they had 1 or 2 albums after that point. 4 Calendar Cafe, I think, might have just come out, which is a lovely album. So yeah, she was trying to find her own feet and establish her own identity. And I kind of was in contact with her for a few years after that point. She came up and did a few live concerts and things. It was wonderful. Again, it was very, very sort of eccentric, the whole thing. But yeah, great experience. She ended up staying in my flat in Glasgow for the gigs and rehearsals, and yeah, lovely person, you know. And you could tell she was trying to find, and I think she eventually did find a way. She moved to Bristol with her then boyfriend, who I think was in Spiritualized, the band.
Oh, okay.
And then got involved with famously Massive Attack, of course, and had the massive hit single with Teardrop. But
Yeah.
the last time she really, there was a flurry of activity within the last couple of years, or I can't remember, before the lockdowns, or that she played in Glasgow with Massive Attack. She came on for a couple of songs down at the big Hydro that I'm talking about, and but she's very good. And I think she also played some gigs at Ronnie Scott's or something, the little jazz club in London. And I'm sure someone mentioned that recently. So there's little sightings, you know, but there's also talk of a solo album. So I'm not sure if that saw the light of day, but you hear all sorts of
I'm not sure either.
things, you know. I know there was something about, I'm sure she worked with a guy from Green from Scritti Politti, that something like I think he contributed lyrics or co-writes, then it was scrapped at the you know, there's all sorts of, so who knows. It sounds like there's probably still demons being worked through there somewhere, or just a lack of confidence or anything. But I mean, my goodness, her legacy is just extraordinary. I mean, she is,
isn't it?
There's very few Cultural Trends tracks I hear, and you know, they often come on the radio or something, and it's always, you know, always enjoy them. It's always just so lovely to listen to. Her inventiveness with melody is brilliant.
They had a knack for that.
Oh yeah, for sure. You know,
love great music.
I
wanted to ask you, your Marina recordings are well loved by your fan base. Can you think of any reasons for that?
I don't know. I think looking back, I was saying to someone recently, the Kelvin Grove Baby album, the third one of the trilogy, which was the biggest selling, commercially the most successful, you know, didn't trouble the top 20 or anything, but it did quite well. I think I do remember at the time thinking to myself, right, this is the time to knuckle down and do quite a commercial record. Now, when I look back, it is really, you know, it isn't a commercial record in the true sense, but that was my sort of attempt at it. But it's still nicely left field. And there are some probably more, say a song like If Love Could Last Forever, it's got a certain degree of accessibility to people. You know, it's catchy. So maybe that way. You know, with Lagoon Blues, the first one had some catchy songs, but it was a bit more arty in kind of overall conception. Sun Powder somewhere between the two, but Kelvin Grove Baby was the one that went for a more conventional approach over the piece, and I think that particular one probably is popular with people, just the most accessible, perhaps.
Yeah. Well, after releasing compilation Desire Regained, 2001, you called it a day.
Yeah, but we did the Pandemonium album after, just between the Marina trilogy of albums and the compilation Desire Regained. We did an album called Pandemonium, and I think that's due to get the reissue treatment this year. Okay. And the version that's up on the streaming platforms is more of a director's cut. And I liked the album first time, but I have improved and enhanced it by just things I wasn't quite, you know, just went back to certain things. I think it's a really strong album. And then I kind of called it a day. I mean, things like being a dad really just got in the way. That's a natural pause point. I just, the kids came along and settled down, and just suddenly from it, you know, your world becomes do the nursery run, do this, do that, you know. And I was always doing music for my own, you know, improving my piano playing. And in the course of that, you may be writing little ideas and things, but I didn't feel particularly driven to be releasing stuff. I never thought I'm retiring. It just, the months and the years go past, you're doing what you do, and suddenly, James Grant actually asked me to. I didn't do live work for a long time, and I was a bit nervous about it, to be fair. But James said, "Would you? I'm going to do a little show in the city halls in Glasgow, a couple hundred people. Would you be interested in coming on for a few songs?" And I was like, "Yeah, okay." And because he's such a technically accomplished performer that it felt like a very secure environment because you were in safe hands, as it were. So yeah, I did that and I enjoyed it. Then he asked me to do a few other things. So I gradually drifted back into being a professional performer again. And then I started to work more seriously on some new material, which is, I've got maybe 30 songs as I've been trying to funnel down into an album that works. And I'm super close. I'm very excited about how it sounds. I splashed out and did some lovely orchestral recording sessions in Glasgow. So there's real strings and things in there, which just sounds gorgeous to me. So looking forward to getting that out there. I'm kind of hoping that the floodgates have been opened and this kind of 30 songs that when I release one album of say 10 songs, the others will follow quite quickly. And I worked with, as I mentioned earlier, I worked with my old friend Paul on his Starless albums. I had some co-writing there. Then I did a fair bit of work to do on the Marina trilogy. I had to redo some vocals, do a lot of remixing, and to make it work for vinyl, I had to kind of slightly revamp it and hopefully improve it. I very much felt I was improving the records. So I did that. Then the Summer Lightning project came along, which stemmed from some early songs, which I again did new versions of. And I finished off some things I'd started and were half written. For example, the title track, Summer Lightning, I just said, no, I like the song, but now I've actually got to complete it. And it turned out well. What's the
reaction of the fans from Summer Lightning?
Been very good, yeah. It's been nice, yeah. I think it's added to the canon. I think it went down well, and that was the first time I've worked with the Last Night from Glasgow label here, and that's been a good relationship. Very easy, very supportive.
Good.
It's all good. So it's all much to look forward to this going into 2023 with the Friends Again reissue, the first Bathers album reissued, brand new album called Sirenesque, which will be the new Bathers record. Then the Pandemonia record, I'd like to get that out on vinyl. Starless has a new record scheduled for next year. So yeah, it's exciting, and try and do as many live shows as we can in any, I'm not too precious about which formulation of the musicians it is. It's all about the songs and just having a chance to, it seems perfectly natural now to throw a few Friends Again songs into a nominally Bathers concert or something. It doesn't matter. I like that. Just draw on what you fancy at that time. If we want to cover State of Art, then fine. Right. Why not? Let's go for it. Let's do it.
Well, on a personal note, I see 2002 was a good year for you and me both. Isn't that the year you got married?
Yes, it is. It is. Yes. Hang on. Yes. Let's get this one right.
You just celebrated your 20th.
Yeah. It was. I met my wife to be in 2001, so we married in 2002. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
the same year.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, it's a vintage year.
Right.
I take it everything's still good at your end.
Right. You beat me by a margin. It's coming up in just a week and a half. 26.
Wow. Okay. Congratulations. Yeah. We were a summer wedding. Yeah. So well, congratulations. Yeah. You got something special planned? Something?
Not really. Probably go to one of our favorite restaurants.
Yeah.
That's what we normally do. Yeah.
Make sure you do. Don't slip up. Don't.
Right.
Well, then, yeah. Gotta get that one. Be on the case. Yeah. No one. Excellent.
Actually, we're opposite in that respect. I'm always remembering dates, and what my wife is really bad about that. Say, this is 20 years, right? Is it really? It's like, yeah. I remember that kind of thing, you know.
You're the dates guy. Yeah. No, my wife is
Yeah.
forensic with anything like this. Birthdays, just nowhere to run, nowhere to hide.
Well, I wanted to ask you. I didn't want to forget to ask you about your gardening, though. I wanted to.
Yes, yeah, that's been a real blessing to me. Um, when my daughter started to go to nursery around about 3 years of age, that was me emerging from the house husband phase, you know. So I didn't have that excuse, the best excuse in the world to be looking after her. But I had some friends who were painters, you know, artistic painters, and they'd been making a bit of extra cash by doing some gardening. And we just moved to a house that had a nice garden, and I thought, well, hang on, that's maybe something I could be doing to make you know, a bit of cash, get me out, get me going. And it really was the best thing I ever did, because the thing about what I do a lot of here, sitting in my little soundproof attic, you know, it's not per se a healthy lifestyle if that's all you're doing.
Right.
But gardening tying in with that means I'm outside, fresh air, sunlight, even in Scotland, and it has a lovely creative and tie-in with making music. There's a certain element of, you know, if I do a beautifully sculpted privet hedge or something, you walk away. I feel sometimes a nice crossover feeling of, yeah, job done. Leaving a garden or landscape looking good. And lucky the area I live in, Glasgow, has some beautiful gardens around, and I'm fortunate to look after some of them. And our own garden's lovely too. So it's good for the soul, good for the mind.
Right.
Whereas a kind of person, I'm not particularly great at motivating. I'm not into sports. I'm not, you know, I can't be, you know, I'm not great. It's my dad's a fantastic, he's 87 years of age, but he's still up there climbing mountains and walking this, walking that. You know, I lack the sort of motivation, or does it, but I like exercising once I'm going, but the gardening gives me a purpose to get me out and get me moving, and it keep me fitter and mentally and physically. And so when I come back to music, and also it takes a lot of the pressure off the making money out of music, which of course is harder and harder for people to do. So I feel quite, you know, landing a sort of sweet spot for me, that I know I can, if I need to make X, I can go out and I try and do gardening. It's seasonal, obviously. I tend to wind down about December, but it tapers off. But even the peak of the season, I'm trying to just do a maximum of, say, 4 shifts a week. Ideally, at this time of year, I'll maybe do 1 or 2 days this week. Gets me out, but it frees me up to really complete these musical things I'm doing, which is, you know, it's, if I stick to that plan as I have been doing the last month or so, I'm covering a lot of productive musical ground.
Right.
Whereas if I was only doing the music, only stuck in the studio, for my personal mindset, I know I would just like be reaching for the chocolate biscuits and kind of getting bored and a bit depressed and frustrated, the lack of progress. But it's just trying to find something that works for you, and this combination definitely works for me. I find it very rewarding.
Right. Well, I was going to say that correlation that you made between gardening and making music.
Yeah.
And in fact, that's why I thought you were interested in doing this interview, was because of Tending the Pale Bloom. You know, I thought that was like the
that was it. You got it. Yeah. Well, yeah. And what does that relate? Do you have any connections with landscaping, that kind of stuff?
No. It's just the Tending the Pale Bloom is about rejuvenating. You know, it's what you do in gardening. You know,
yeah.
Rejuvenating an interest in music, maybe past, bygone artists that were popular at one point in time, and helping to nourish that, you know, water that, you know, spritz it a little bit, you know, the bulbs, and helping them
nurturing it. Yeah, lovely. No, it's lovely.
So that's the concept behind it. So I thought when I sent that and you read that, you thought, oh, okay.
I mean, where do I sign?
But there's behind me you can see the
I can see the bloom on it.
Nice. I came up with that eons ago, but so it's kind of the like I said, the concept behind this, and it seems to be, you know, good. I mean, Good foundation.
Yeah, I mean, as I said at the beginning, I think it's kind of almost the lifeblood of the cottage industry, if you like, of the way the music scene's gone, and all sorts of creative things that, you know, it's nice to have conversations like this. It just, yeah, bring it out into the world. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. And hopefully bring together, you know, like-minded
yeah,
individuals.
it's good. It's good. It's been fun as well, enjoyable, a nice chat. You know, really a real pleasure.
Yeah, and I can't think of. Can you think of anything else, Chris? You'd like to
No, I
add?
mean, pretty comprehensive. Yeah, that was an enjoyable. You know, I suppose from the artist's point of view, there's certain kind of memories you've jogged by asking questions.
Right.
You know, you don't know the answer to. You suddenly set off down a path, and that happened, and you remember things in a different order, in a different way, with different emphasis. So it's a nice experience to be able to revisit it and make sense of it, and it obviously feeds into what you're doing going forward as well. Right. And it's a lovely thing if it whether it's 10 people, 100 people, or 2 people, or 10,000 people discovering and enjoying the things you have done. You know, that's a, you know, it's a wonderful thing from the creator's point of view.
Yeah, well, you mentioned rewarding. It's been very rewarding for me.
Well,
you know.
well, likewise, you know, just a real pleasure to chat, and you know, your questions were great. You know, we sort of, but I didn't wrap up too much. They got
I like to jog the memory and interesting stories and anecdotes.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah, every conversation always throws up a different slant on it, doesn't it? You know,
right. It really does.
It does.
You got that right. Got that right.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Cool. That's been lovely. So
Right.
it's 6 o'clock here. I think I can smell a roast chicken cooking up.
It's getting dinner time.
So what does the day hold for you? You heading out and about, or?
I might. You know, it rained all last night, and we have a Labradoodle.
All right.
So yeah, he freaks out anytime it rains, storms or thunders. The thunder just freaks. So he woke me up about 4 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
Yeah. And so yeah, he finally calmed down. But yeah, we always dread when it's going to thunder, because we know what he's going to do.
Okay.
But so I didn't get the best night's sleep. I might go take a little nap. But
I was similar. Our cat sometimes just kicks off in the middle of the night for no reason. So yeah, I was a bit the same last night. It was at 4 in the morning. I was awake and then got back. You know, it's never quite the same when you get back to sleep. You know,
it's not.
Yeah, feeling a little bit sleepy, but I'm sure the as I say, that roast chicken dinner is going to hit the spot. I think
it's going to
revive me.
Right.
That's cool. That's really nice. Fantastic. Right. Okay, we'll stay in touch, and you know, hopefully it'll, I'll you know, keep. Do you follow the Bathers or on the social media platforms to see what's coming up, and friends again for that matter?
Yes,
things. There should, as I say, there should be a lot of good stuff on its way. Really excited about this upcoming chapter.
I'll keep up with that.
Keep spreading the word. It's much appreciated.
I'll let you know once I've edited this down a little bit, and then once I get it posted live, I'll let you know.
And I can share the links and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, fantastic. Please tell everybody. Tell the postman. Tell the grocer. Tell.
Oh yeah. Right. That's the only way. Great stuff. Okay. Good. Right. Well, lovely to chat to you, Greg, and we'll look forward to hearing the edit or whatever. Yeah.
Right. And best of luck to you. Okay.
Best luck. Take care. All the best. Cheers now. Bye. Bye. Bye.